Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Ask the Theologian on this Tuesday. Delighted you have joined us for your biblical, theological, and worldview questions, where we will question the assumptions, and we will try to rightly divide the word of truth, and we will get right into your questions. We've got a couple that we had left over from yesterday, and we had a question from Rick yesterday, had to do with Peter Ruckman and his teaching that it is possible that the great white throne was not for unbelievers only, but was also for tribulation saints. Now, I have not actually gone back to dissect Peter Ruckman's teaching. I'm just taking Pastor Rick's word on it, that there would be the tribulation saints at the great white throne judgment. Here's a couple of things I'm thinking on how do you get there. One is that the great white throne judgment, you remember this is in Revelation chapter 20, and at the great white throne judgment, we have the fact that all of the Old Testament saints have been raptured at the second coming. Let me use this hand. Here's the second coming. They've been raptured. All of the New Testament believers, they've been resurrected, I should say, at the rapture. So you have the resurrection at the rapture, the resurrection at the second coming. That is everybody who is a believer, if you will. And yet then you've got some people who are born during the tribulation, during the kingdom. The kingdom, of course, is 1,000 years, so presumably you have a lot of people being born. Those people, I think, are born of Gentiles who are allowed into the kingdom. And they then would have their judgment, assuming there has to be a judgment, they have their judgment at the great white throne. Now, that's really not the tribulation saints, however. The tribulation saints are, I think, judged at the judgment of the nations, which is Matthew chapter 24. So I would put the tribulation saints out of it. I would say, okay, maybe there's a possibility of those born during the millennial kingdom itself. Now, with all of that said, let me say that there are some who do argue that church-age believers are going to be at the great white throne judgment. Not so much in being judged for their own works, because they would put that at the bema seat, but they put a couple of things together. One is we will always be with the Lord. And they say, well, the Lord's at the great white throne judgment. We'll always be with the Lord. Therefore, we will be there with him. They use also then 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2, which says, do you not know that saints will judge the world? And if the world shall be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? And so with that then, there is the understanding from some, I don't take this interpretation, but there's the understanding of some that we are the saints and we will judge the world, and the judgment of the world is going to take place at the judgment of the nations, and 1,000 years later at the great white throne judgment. And so though God is the supreme judge, we are going to judge the world with him. Now, I think the problem there is that saints isn't us. Personally, we've talked about that many times before. Then another argument that somebody else, two more arguments that somebody else will be there besides those who are whose name is not written in the Lamb's Book of Life. Revelation chapter 3, verse 10 is the church at Philadelphia, I think. I could be wrong on that. The church at one of the seven assemblies of the Revelation. And verse 10 says, because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I will also keep thee from the hour of temptation which shall come upon the world, to try them that dwell upon the earth. I actually think that's not talking about the great white throne judgment, but a few people do. I think that's talking about a protection that is given to those Jewish people in the time which is coming, which is the time of the Great Tribulation. I don't apply it also to the church. One more thing I would add, and that's Revelation chapter 20, verse 15. Whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. That is at the great white throne judgment. Now, here's where Ruckman probably comes from in his strongest argument. Again, I'm assuming his argument. I may be completely off on where he is. I'm not a Ruckmanite. I'm not anti-Ruckmanite. I'm just not all that familiar with Ruckman's teaching. But the issue here in Revelation chapter 20, verse 15, again, whosoever was not found in the book of life. The way we normally interpret the great white throne judgment, nobody there is found in the book of life. So why is that verse written in such a way that it sounds like some people there did have their name in the Lamb's book of life? That then would give an openness to maybe tribulation saints who come in, but again, I think their judgment is at the great white throne judgment, at the second coming judgment, the judgment of the nations. But if you bypass that, then they come through. We want to say there has to be a judgment for everyone. It is appointed unto man once to die and then the judgment. So which judgment is going to be there? Again, that's probably some assumptions that we should question. But to boil that question down, okay, maybe I can see it. Maybe I can understand that. Maybe there's an argument there. Ruckman is much aligned, but he actually had a pretty good mind and had some pretty good logic. I didn't always agree with his assumptions, he held some assumptions about the King James Bible, for example, that really required a second inspiration or almost an additional inspiration of God. I don't think there's any requirement for that, for example. So we could have things that we would disagree with, but like Bullinger, I would say don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Ruckman had a good mind, almost brilliant perhaps, to the point that it's worthy of listening to his argument. Even for those who are, anti-Ruckman, what I see is anti-Ruckmanites are like anti-Bullingerites. That is, here's 2, 3, 4 things we disagree with Ruckman or Bullinger, therefore everything Ruckman or Bullinger said is just absolutely garbage. Well, that's you should question the assumptions on that kind of thing. These were men who had brilliant ideas. So one of these days I found some sermons, but I did not find anything in text, and I didn't have time to listen to the sermons, and so I did not find exactly what his logic is or his preaching is on that, but it's available out there. And my guess is, again, he's got some worthy logic, whether or not the assumptions at the bottom of the logic are good. I've told you a number of times that you need to beware of accepting an argument just because it is logical. Truth is that Calvinism is very logical. It is the reason there are 5 points of Calvinism, not 4, not 3, not 2, not 1. There's 5 points of Calvinism, one building upon another. You really have to, if one comes out, the whole domino thing falls down. And it is a very logical argument, but it's built upon a completely false premise or a false assumption. So, obviously, you don't want an illogical argument. Then you can probably knock that one out before you ever even get to the assumptions. But it's the foundation of the argument that really matters. So Ruckman has logical arguments. That doesn't mean they're right. What they're right based upon is the foundational assumption, right or wrong. He's got some assumptions to get there, just like most of us have assumptions not to go there, But, many, many times our assumptions are wrong, aren't they? Which is why we question the assumptions. And this is Tuesday, Ask the Theologian. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for that question yesterday, Pastor Rick. I appreciate that. Tony in Georgia had another question yesterday that I punted on because we were out of time towards the end. And that question had to do with Psalm 136 and especially verses, I believe it was 19, 19 and 20, where it talks about Sihon, king of the Amorites, for his mercy endureth forever. Og, king of Bashan, for his mercy endureth forever. And by the way, I've been to the land of the Amorites and I've been to Bashan. Bashan is actually very beautiful. As a matter of fact, to get away from the subject just a little bit, Bashan is the Golan Heights, basically. And Israel right now is getting more rain than they have ever had in 50, 60, 70 years. Beautiful. It's going to be a beautiful year to go to Israel. And I think you ought to just go ahead and sign up for that. It's Bashan typically is a beautiful place anyway, and green hills, lush, a place for the cattle to feed and get fat, which is why, was it Amos talked about the heifers up there on Bashan, talking about some of the ladies, perhaps not in such a politically correct way, but Israel just rejoice. They're getting, in fact, for the first time, probably since the 1950s, they will be opening up the dam on for water reservoirs that manages the Sea of Galilee. And this is just unheard of. I mean, every year I've gone, the Sea of Galilee has been low, and now it's about to overflow. Just amazing things, which was not part of the question. We're talking about Sihon and Og, enemy kings. Now, they are mentioned in relation to Israel going into the land of Israel. And Tony asked, why are these two kings specifically mentioned? Let's get just a little bit of context here. In Psalm 136, it is, as I mentioned yesterday, I suspected, it is a psalm of rain, R-E-I-G-N. And the three types of psalms are the Revelation Psalm, the Remnant Psalm, the Rain Psalm. We're going to be teaching these in our Labor Day Bible Conference in Branson, by the way, this year. Would love for you all to plan on being there. The material will be out here in another week or so, and you'll be able to register for that. But the Revelation songs teach us something about the Messiah. The remnant songs teach us something about Israel in the tribulation, and the rain psalms teach us something about the millennial kingdom. There are only three kinds of psalms. All of them are prophetic, with the exception of perhaps Revelation. It's prophetic in the sense that it's revealing something about the Messiah. But you've got these three prophecies or types of prophecy within the psalm. When you understand that, things begin to come together. So these rain psalms are about the millennial kingdom. They almost always come after a psalm or a series of psalms, which is often called like the imprecatory psalms or the lament psalms, because those are remnant psalms. They are the times when Israel is really under pressure in the tribulation, and then it comes out with their Messiah coming to rescue them. So Psalm 136 is a psalm of praise on the victory that the Messiah has brought. It says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever." You've heard this psalm because over and over it has this chorus, his mercy endureth forever, his mercy endureth forever. And it gives praise to God who has rescued them. Now, in the midst of this praise to God, why would you have this Sihon, king of the Amorites, his mercy endureth forever, Og, king of Bashan, for his mercy endureth forever? Now, you really do have to go back to verse 17 To him which smote great kings, for his mercy endureth forever, and slew famous kings, for his mercy endureth forever. One of those famous kings or great kings is Sihon, king of the Amorites, and another is Og, king of Bashan, that he has smote them or slew them, and brought them to an untimely death, just as our United States Marines did for General Soleimani, I believe his name was. And this section here, verses 17 through 20, 21 actually, because after it speaks about it, it says, and gave their land for an heritage. I think this is the key right here, gave their land for a heritage, is that both this area of the Amorites and this area of Bashan are areas that the tribes eventually were given. And the discussion here is not, it is in a sense their journey towards the promised land, the children of Israel, in their journey towards the promised land, God killing their enemies on the way. But specifically here, the enemies whose land he would turn over and then give to portions of Ephraim and Manasseh. And so I think that's the reason. In a general sense, these are two kings that display the enemy. You know, in the United States, of course, we have that little phrase, remember the Alamo. And this is very different because Israel, the Jewish people under the hand of God, they obviously overthrew and had a victory over the Amorites and over Og. So the issue, the point I bring up on the remember the Alamo is there just are certain battles down through history that speak to the whole. Waterloo, for example, Concord and Lexington, the shot that was heard around the world. We may not know the Revolutionary War, but we know the shot that was heard around the world that started the Revolutionary War. And so I think that in a general sense, these two kings display the victory that God gave the people in their entrance into the promised land, and this is why they're mentioned. But specifically, why these two kings, I think it has to do with verse 21. He gave their land for a heritage. By the way, if you have the companion Bible, Bullinger notes, I've got it here on the left side of the screen here, he notes that Psalm 135 and 136 have parallel structure. And just to give you a little bit of hint on how to read Bullinger outlines, he goes along with letters here. The reason he starts with E is because it's tied into other places, and so there's an A, B, C, and a D somewhere else. But here, what you look at is E answers to E. If you notice, this E down here is italicized, this E down here is not. So a standard E answers to an italicized E, F answers to F, G answers to G. And what he has noted here, and he does this brilliantly all throughout the scripture, is that you have in the structure an exhortation to praise, an exhortation to praise, creative wonders, deliverance from Egypt, deliverance from Egypt. Deliverance on the journey, or on journey as he says here, deliverance on the journey into the promised land. And here, deliverance on the journey. Gift of land, goodness to his people, goodness to his people. And all of his outlines work this way, and he has various structures that are given. But he brings out the point that most probably miss, that Psalm 135 and Psalm 136 are parallel, they're what he calls extended alternation. That is, they alternate. in an extended passage here, the entire chapter. Now, he has done this brilliantly with the entire Bible. His outlines are hard to understand and absolutely brilliant. The reason they're hard to understand is they're not primary versions. What it does in carrying this out, he argues in the book that we sell and actually are working on producing our own version of it because the one that's out there has some errors in it. But working on our own version of it, how to enjoy the Bible, he really talks about how this structure goes together. It's an advanced class, no doubt about it, but one of the things is he talks about you can enjoy the Bible or interpret the Bible only when you really know its structure. You've got to have the context, because if you don't recognize the entire structure, then you might miss the forest for the sake of the trees. And do that theologically, and that can be disastrous. Just a side note that is given there. Scott in East Texas, Dr. White, what news outlets or websites do you use to keep informed regarding current events? Well, I just read it on Facebook, and it's got to be true because Facebook actually filters the news so that we only get the truth. Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. Yeah. You have a good question because it is difficult to find what is the real news. I used to be a news junkie. I'm not anymore. I honestly rarely watch the news, and typically if I do watch the news or a news broadcast or an opinion broadcast, as most of them are, it is only because I want to turn my mind off a little bit and I'm thinking about too many things. And if I turn on the news, that'll sort of distract my mind and you know, I go to sleep through it. So I really don't watch that much television news. And I think that One America News, though they don't often have the slickest presentation, One America News does seem to stick just with the news. This is very difficult, and I think whether it's One America or some other station, if a news organization would say, what we do is present the news. It's a novel idea. If a newspaper would do it. I think there's a huge market out there that just wants to hear the facts, like real journalism, like someone actually checked this out, like you know, they verified that this is the case, that it is not necessarily even giving you fair and balanced. Because fair and balanced means we're going to tell you the side on the right and we're going to tell you the side on the left, or whatever the two sides may be. We're going to share and we're going to be fair and balanced, and we report, you decide. I don't even want that. I just want to know what happened. An airplane came, it dropped a missile, it killed a general on the, 7:30 p.m. on the whatever date it was. The facts, who, what, when, where, why. Now, One America News pretty much sticks to who, what, when, where, why. I do that, and then I can figure out all the spin that you want to get on it and all that kind of stuff through all of that. So finding the facts is very difficult. Now, when I really want to know the facts, honestly, what I will kind of do, and you have to filter through this, but if I want to dig into something, I'll go to Twitter. And I'm not a huge Twitter user. I tweet some things out there and then I'm bad about responding. But I do sometimes go to Twitter to just see what people are saying about the facts. Now, do that just a little bit, and I can pretty well figure out this is one approach to it, here's another approach to it, and I can begin to cipher that through my mind. Now, another thing I might say is that 99% of the news, I don't know that we have to keep up with it. It doesn't hurt our lives if we didn't know that. It's not going to affect the decisions that we're going to make today, tomorrow, this decade, or the next decade. And the big stuff is going to kind of come up. So I actually, for years, back in the 90s, I quit wearing a watch. And I don't have a watch on. And I quit wearing a watch mainly because I didn't have any money, and every watch I got broken or quit telling me the time or whatever, and I quit wearing a watch. Now, this was before the days of cell phones. I do happen to have a cell phone now, and of course it tells me what time it is. But what I learned in not wearing a watch is two things. First of all, every Christmas somebody would give me a watch because they say, oh, he doesn't have a watch, I'll give him a watch. And I always said, thank you. And then I always thought, okay, what am I going to do with this watch? Because I don't wear a watch. But that was one thing I learned. The second thing that I learned was that you don't need a watch. The reason you don't need a watch is if you don't have one, you can easily train yourself to always figure out what time it is. It was not hard. Again, in the 90s, maybe, in the 1400s it was hard, but I don't think they had a watch. But even before cell phones and computers were everywhere and all that kind of stuff, nobody had laptops in those days and all that kind of stuff. But it was easy. I trained myself. I would look over to his both sides of me. I'll have somebody with a watch on, and I can easily just glance over and read it. This is what preachers do with the names on the Bibles, by the way. This is why it is recommended that you have your name engraved on a Bible, because the preacher can't remember your name. And he looks over, and he's very skilled at finding that. Used to be able to do it on belts, too, but that's only in a few places in Texas now that people put their name on the back of the belt to help the preacher. But anyway, through all of that, this does get down to the news. What I learned is you can figure out what time it is. And somebody is going to tell you, hey, it's almost 10:30. So the news is the same way. If you don't watch the news, you're going to find out the news you need to know. And then you can move forward and investigate into that news. So I think that 24/7 news has been the pox of journalism. I think that now they have to produce something, and they're always trying to get something out there, and that's causing them to be just opinion stations and make everything up and all that kind of stuff that honestly we don't need. So what news outlets or websites? Honestly, I don't have any regulars. Again, I mentioned One American News. There's a Israeli one, Arutz Sheva, which is, I believe, IsraelNationalNews.com. I brought it up here. IsraelNationalNews.com. And it is a pretty conservative. It does have a slant to it. It's not true journalism, but it has a conservative slant to it of news in Israel. And so sometimes, especially for Israeli politics or things in the Middle East, I'll go there and notice they have this article here. We know exactly what's going on with Iran's nuclear program, Netanyahu says. And he thinks Iran will obtain nuclear weapons, but Israel will never allow that to happen. So if I want to know what Israel's right-wing view is, I'll go to Arutz Sheva, Channel 7 News, basically is what that is, IsraelNationalNews.com. Thank you. So it's a little bit of search hear that something happened, and then go do your research dependent upon that event. Appreciate that. And then Bob from snowy Newport, Washington asks, where do I find session 1 of the Prophecy Primer in YouTube format? And you had a hard time because we hadn't set that up, but now we have, thanks to your question. And so if you go to our Randy White, youtube.com/Randy White, slide down just a little bit to the created playlist, and now we have a prophecy primer right there as of just a few moments ago. And I'm not sure why we have that gross advertisement, as it says there. But if you need a plumber, then I can tell you where to get one. And let's see, how to read the Bible is the first sermon. Right there we go. How to read the Bible, number 1 of a prophecy primer. And there are 2 so far. We will have at least 1 more that will come this Sunday. So that is always up. Let me also say, of course, that at any time you can also go to randywhiteministries.org and find those right there. And the prophecy primer is right up at the top. I suppose if we refresh there, we'll have today's broadcast going on right there. And the Gospel of John is tomorrow night, by the way. There's 1 session there. There's 2 sessions in a prophecy primer. Thanks for that question. I appreciate that comment there. And thank you, Jeffrey Baruch, for showing off helping me show off the Sephardi accent. I'm not very good at it. And thank you. Paul in New York mentions that Ruckman was a bit of a racist. I am going to assume you're right. I don't really know. I was a little hesitant because I want to say, as I've said to church people for many, many years, some advice I got from an old preacher who told his congregation always, he said, if you didn't see my mouth moving, I didn't say it. So there is, for a pastor or a Bible teacher, there is sometimes the accusation that they said he was this, and yet you can't actually find his mouth moving ever saying that. So I would want to verify that a little bit, but I also would just say, let's see, Peter Ruckman was born in 1921, died in 2016. I think I'm pretty safe to say that anyone born in 1921 in the American South, he served in Pensacola, had a view of race that is not compatible with today, and some expressions of that which are not compatible with today's views. So maybe we can say, and this is not really an excuse for that, but maybe we can say he was a man of his times. And all of us do kind of pick up some of that. And it would be interesting sometime to take some of the phraseology that was used and determine whether or not that was truly racist phraseology or that was just the way things were said in that day. There might be a little bit difference. I hate to make much excuse. I really don't have any room for true racism, and he very well might have had that. I would say this is unfortunate, but among Baptists, whether they're Southern Baptist or Independent Baptist, it wouldn't be hard to find of men of that generation, born again in 1921, and through all that. So you very well could be right there. I appreciate your comments on that. And Family Architect down in California, glad to have you this morning. I was scrolling through that's probably DPH, Dispensational Publishing Warehouse website this morning, and I noticed a series of books entitled Unusual Bible Interpretations. Sound interesting. Could you speak on this series a little? Yes, I can. And let me see if I can bring any of this up. And we have, looking for that particular series. There we go. Unusual Bible Interpretations. There's one for Joshua and Judges and Jonah and Amos and Ruth and Esther and Judith, which is not a book of the Bible, but is of the Apocrypha, and the 5 books of Moses. Israel Drazin, Brigadier General / Rabbi Israel Drazin. And let's also look at, see if I can bring this up. See if one of you can find the Dispensational Publishing YouTube page. They'll send me a text on it, on where that is, and I'll pull that up. We did an interview with Israel Drazin through Dispensational Publishing House, which might be interesting for you to watch. It is on the YouTube page for Dispensational Publishing, which is a page that we haven't really developed and used much, so there's not a lot out there. But what Israel Drazin had a spectacular military career, and his career really was in, I forget the military term for it, but knowledge, learning things about the enemy. There's a word for all that in there, isn't there? But he had a very distinguished military career and became a rabbi. Now, as kind of an investigator, he wrote this series of books on unusual Bible interpretations. He presented these unusual Bible interpretations, and let me tell you what they are. They're unusual Bible interpretations. But I found them interesting because they come 100% from a Jewish perspective. So when you're studying these particular books of the Bible, I found a number of occasions, I originally ran across them when I was studying the book of Ruth. I found a number of occasions in which some obscure rabbi or rabbinical teaching out there taught something about that passage that I thought, that is very interesting, and was able to follow some trails and find out, hey, guess what? Now here's the problem with them, and I think for this reason we have, if I am not mistaken, let me find the one on Ruth here and I'll bring it up. If I am not mistaken, we have a disclaimer on, yes, down at the bottom of the page. So all of these have a disclaimer. And I'll just read it to you. The books of Israel Drazin are very informative and valuable for students of the Word who want to go a step further into biblical interpretation. However, Dr. Drazin does not come from a perspective of inerrancy, and the dispensational student will reject some of his conclusions. They are definitely question the assumptions kinds of books. He does not present them as this is the interpretation of Ruth. He presents Rabbi so-and-so taught this, and Rabbi so-and-so taught that, and this fellow taught this, and boy, isn't that weird? So it's just kind of a smorgasbord of interpretations that you haven't heard very much. But there's some very interesting stuff. Now, what I must say is that we have had a hard time getting these books now. They're published in Israel, and I can get them from Israel only. You can probably find one or two of them on Amazon, but they're even difficult to find there. Sorry to say bad words here in the program. But we're having a hard time getting them unless I ship them from Israel, and by the time I do that, they become rather expensive books. So most of them, I think, are just available. We put them available on back order, and then we see if we can find one and work on that. But if you can find one and you want one, go ahead and order it. So they're interesting. Now, did we find that? Yes, okay. Here is, if I can figure out how to do this. Okay, they figured it out for me. So if, I don't know how they found this, but nonetheless, Dispensational Publishing House, look for it on YouTube. And we have a number of author hangouts. Most of them are pretty old because we haven't done much with them. But here's the author hangout with Brigadier General Dr. Israel Drazin, an hour and 4 minutes and 57 seconds of entertainment. It's worth listening to there. And again, he's a liberal. He's a religious liberal. He's a liberal Jew, lives in Florida now. But very interesting guy. and does present some things that are worthy of looking into and digging into. I've enjoyed the books and received some good things. Some of you know I kind of like unusual Bible interpretations myself. So appreciate that, Tim, in Southern California. God bless you. Thanks for being here with us this morning. Michael has a question, part 1. Jesus says, Matthew 23:29, that this guy's wife in the resurrection will be like the angels. Didn't he say for all of eternity? Part 2, did he mean all eternity or just one day when the resurrection happens? This is a good question. We bumped on this just a little bit yesterday. And Matthew 23:29, let's go back onto it, to it. And let's see, I think that may be the wrong scripture reference. We are looking for the passage about whose wife will she be. Matthew 22:28, rather than 23. Let's see. Yes, it's Matthew. Matthew chapter 22, verse 28. So we were just one number off on both of those, but Matthew 22:28, therefore in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7? And a very interesting question. I hadn't thought about it in this light, but it says, not whose wife shall she be for eternity, but on the day the resurrection happens. Let's see. If you take the term resurrection here, again in verse 30, in the resurrection they neither marry nor given, but touching as the resurrection of the dead, it would be worthy to take that phrase, the resurrection, and see if you could make the argument that on the day of the resurrection, when we talk about the resurrection, was it like Mary or Martha? I should look that up because I never can remember. Mary or Martha says, well, I know he'll live again in the resurrection or at the resurrection. So I would want to see, is there the ability to take that term, the resurrection, and use it to mean into eternity, going beyond that? It's got the day of the resurrection and on, or are we just talking about on resurrection day she's not married? What happens after that? Maybe we're making an assumption that's not safe. Now, I think probably that we could take this and do some study of that term, the resurrection, and probably see that we're talking about from resurrection day and onward. But I think that you've got a very good point that we ought to nail that down and make sure that indeed we can do that. Otherwise, we're talking about resurrection day. Good point. I appreciate you bringing that about. And we have Barbara in Kaufman, who has been in the hospital for all of this time. And we are so delighted to see that you are able to join us again. We've been missing you for Ask the Theologian. She had quite the journey, the health journey. And so we are very glad. Thank you, Barbara, for being back with us. But a question from your sister. What are your thoughts on Lisa Turkhurst's "It's not supposed to be that way"? It's another one of these that I don't keep up with, women Bible study teachers, but let's just go to her website and see if we can discern anything about Lisa Turkhurst. Am I pronouncing that correct? And they use cookies because we're all scared of the European Union. Oh, the European Union says they're going to do cookies! Ah! Nonetheless, we let's try to look at this, Lisa. And I always like to go to a statement of faith, which are typically very hard to find. We can find her. These are a few of my favorite things, but we have no idea what she believes. Resources, maybe. Let's see if we've got it there. No, there's the stuff we can buy from Lisa. Let's see here. What happens when women walk in faith? That sounds like making stuff up. Made to crave. Let's see. Well, I can't quite read that. I'm going to have to go to it and see. Made to crave takes you through a much deeper, richer, and more meaningful journey. Okay. Something probably about all of this stuff here, these titles here, triggers to truth, guilt to peace, desperation to determination. It looks to me like it is kind of feel-good stuff about some spiritual disciplines or something along those lines. Let's see, unglued. I guess it just depends on what's coming unglued there. I'm gonna guess, just from looking at this, it looks to me to be kind of typical women's ministry, feel-good type stuff. Now, because once again, these appear to be Bible studies. These are presented as Bible studies, but there's no statement of faith. And every statement of faith is in and of itself very limited, but I'd rather have something very limited that gets me started on things to know about. And so I would want to know, where's Lisa coming from through all of this? I don't know. Let's try a few of her favorite things. And what do we got? Monday night family dinners is one of her favorite things. Serving at my church. I wonder which one that is. She likes cheddar cheese and nut-thin crackers and almonds, and Targets and Marshalls and Nordstrom's. Oh, well, my goodness, she's qualified. Why do you put that you like cheddar cheese and nut-thin crackers, but you don't tell us what your theology is? Theology might be cheddar cheese and nut-thin crackers. Oh, this is wonderful, ladies. Come together. We're going to have cheddar cheese and nut-thin crackers. Oh, this is going to be lovely. Oh, bring your mugs, ladies. Okay, that's my impression of women's Bible studies. They're not even Bible studies, honestly. They're books by, I don't know, Lisa, is this her name? I've already forgot. Turkhurst. President of Proverbs 31 Ministries, New York Times bestselling author of Uninvited, blah, blah, blah. She and her team have led thousands to make their walk with God an invigorating journey through daily online devotionals. Daily online devotionals, or just daily devotionals. We've talked about this before. Lots of danger there. Radio programs through Salem. If you got the money, you can put it on. Salem, also known as Cha-ching, Cha-ching, Cha-ching Ministries. Online Bible studies. Well, that's a good thing. Online Bible studies, right? Speaker, writer training, and more. Champions of Faith Author Award. I'm not sure who that comes from. Focus on the Family. That's CNN Online. Okay, two leftist organizations. Appeared on the Today Show. You only do that because you're kind of pretty and you don't say anything of substance. So I'm going to have to say that I don't really have thoughts on It's Not Supposed to Be This Way. That's my thoughts on Lisa Turquist, who I've never heard of before, and I'm sure she hadn't heard of Randy White either. And I'm sure she could go to my website and give plenty of criticism, and she's welcome to come do so. Maybe I'll learn something, and maybe she'll learn something. But I don't see anything there that would say, here's a woman that appears to be teaching Bible study. And everything I find there looks to be a woman who is helping women have good social experiences with a Jesus element to it. That's mostly women's Bible studies. Women's Bible studies have become worthless for the most part. You know what? Let me tell you a little bit about our local church here in Taos, New Mexico. Obviously, we're a tiny church, smaller than most of your Sunday school classes. But nonetheless, from time to time, someone will come into our church. They love our church. They come, they love it at first because the music is fabulous. Old 70-year-old hymns and out-of-tune singers. It's fabulous. I mean, just like church used to be. And nice family feel, and we do have good food. We got the best food in the country. We eat at our church. There's two things we do. We eat and we preach. That's about all we do. We don't vacuum the floor very often. We don't fix things up. The door's fallen off. We have no bathroom. But nonetheless, we eat and we have Bible studies, and we love each other. Now, don't you wish you had the church like that? And you could fix the door if you'd come. But someone will come in from typical evangelicalism, and they'll say, oh, this is wonderful. We should have women's Bible studies. So I'm going to get women's Bible studies. And all the ladies who have been here are like, no. Because what they don't understand is that our church, if you can get to Bible study overload, that's where our church would be. Because we have a lot of Bible study. As you know, I had a tweet just the other day about producing or preaching somewhere around 175 times a year, 175 different Bible studies every year. It's a rough count, but somewhere in that number. Now, a person in our church that follows all of that, they don't have any more mental ability, let alone time to keep up with another women's Bible studies. Here's my premise. Women's Bible studies came to fill a vacuum. Pastors are to blame for women's Bible studies because pastors quit doing Bible studies. Pastors come to preach one 25-minute sermon a week and groan about how overloaded they are. And this never used to be the case. Back, Barbara knows this, of course, and many of you know this, that you go back into, let's say the mid-'80s and earlier, every pastor did, at least in conservative churches, every pastor did Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. The big wigs didn't do Sunday school. They only did 3 a week. But everybody did 3, 4 Bible studies every week. They were substantive. They were 30, 40, 50 minutes. They were, for the most part, exegetical Bible study. And a lady was saying, I go to Sunday school, I go to worship service, I come back early on Sunday night to either be in a committee or be in the choir or be in a discipleship class. I then go hear the preacher preach another sermon. I then go to Monday night visitation. I then come back and do Wednesday night Bible study, a different Bible study with the church. And now you want me to come to women's Bible study on Thursday morning? I can't handle it. I'm already accused of needing to pay rent here at the church because I'm here so much. Now, when pastors begin to back off of that and say, oh, you don't need another church, we just need to gather together in fellowship and blah, 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 and all these kind of things that preachers do now, to where now they come for this 25-minute week sermonette, or as Lance Havner said, sermonettes for Christianettes. Now that that's all they do, well, women said, I'd like a little more Bible study. The problem is that In women's Bible study, this is 100% true. In women's Bible study, those like Lisa Turquoise, they didn't come up through their church under the authority of their church and the guidance of their pastor. They developed their own ministry outside of the church, and publishing houses like Lifeway, and I don't know who Lisa Turquoise publisher is, probably in-house Proverbs 31 Ministries. They just cropped up out there kind of rogue. And it's been really problematic, I think, almost from the beginning. And Lisa Turquoise, from what I can see, she has that junior league look that is required for all women's Bible study teachers, and she probably has nice flowers sitting on her desk and beautiful mugs and coffee and what was it? Cheddar cheese nut thin crackers, maybe with some almonds and Melba toast. Nobody eats Melba toast. How's that for saying a lot of stuff? This is why our program always goes over time. Lori says, and I assume Lori knows what she's talking about, that she's part of Elevation Church with Stephen Furtick. That being the case, it just adds to everything I've said. Just say, if that's true, and that's the part of the fellowship she's part of, then everything I said was well understated. Who knows? Pastor Bob, good comment. A news station that gives only the news, sort of like a church that sticks to the Bible. You're right. Hard to find, wouldn't it, to be? Okay. With apologies, Stephen, NASCAR fans do have race issues, don't they? And let's see. Michael on Vimeo. Good to see you from North Carolina. Amorites were giants and were supposed to have been destroyed by Joshua. He failed. Did this lead to the story of David and Goliath? Yes, I totally think so. Og of Bashan was the king of the Amorites. Do I have that right? We talked about Og and Sihon earlier. Nonetheless, both of those were of the same vein, so it doesn't matter if we mix up the names, if you'll allow me to. And they were of the giants, that is, of the Nephilim. My position is that after the ark, the Noah's flood was necessary because of the Nephilim. I think the scripture's clear enough on that in Genesis chapter 6. But the Nephilim were not totally eradicated in the flood, which means there's one of two ways you get Nephilim or giants after the flood, and that is either coming through the line of Ham somehow, with either Ham's wife, Mrs. Piggy, either she was of that line and therefore her descendants were of that line, or she had had an illicit affair before she came on and she was pregnant, and that Canaan actually was a result of Nephilim and not the son of Ham. It's one of those two things in my assumptions. So I think, however, the continued new creation of Nephilim or giant strains stopped at the flood. And the demons that were causing this, they were placed into prison, and nobody was doing it after the flood. But that line continued. Now, obviously, David is quite a few years after the flood. 3,000 years after the flood? But what you have here is that DNA strain is being diluted, is not as powerful as it once was, but does explain for those like Goliath and Goliath's brothers and those of that particular Amorite line. And Og is the one that King Saul, just before, but really during the time of David, King Saul was supposed to kill but didn't, do you remember? And Samuel went in and sliced him and diced him like a good priest should, doing that which Israel was supposed to have done previously, because Og was hope I'm getting not mixing up my stories, crossing some wires here. But the bottom line is, yes, that did lead to the story of David and Goliath. So David, I think, understands two things. One is that you just can't come in and taunt the armies of the living God. Armies of the living God don't hide under the bed. And so David took a little bit of a Trump approach and said, no, we're dealing with it. We're going to deal with it now. If I have to go out and deal with it myself with a rock, I'm going to deal with it. He understood that. He also, I think, though it's not mentioned in the story, I think he understands these are the guys that we were supposed to get rid of a long time ago, and we didn't. So no better time than the present. And he went forward with it. I appreciate all of that. Okay. We have, let's see, from Facebook, how do you answer when you say teach the word only and don't use movies, TVs, etc.? And they bring up Paul and Mars Hill. Good point, because this is from John on Facebook. I appreciate that. You know, when Paul was on Mars Hill, that is... the 17th chapter of the book of Acts. So Paul is in Athens. By the way, working on I'm doing a trip in October, going back to Athens and to Mars Hill. Would love to take you. But Acts chapter 17, verse 22, Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, "Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you're too superstitious." I can stop right there. So you say, what do you just stick to the word. You don't need the movies. You don't need the TV, the dramas, all that kind of stuff. And you say, when they bring up Paul and Mars Hill. Now, they is the people, the seeker-sensitive movement, the church growth movement, the movement that says, we need to connect with them where they are, like Paul did on Mars Hill. And this is because, you remember, Mars Hill was where the altar to the unknown God was. And Paul says, let me tell you who this God is. And so their very selective reading of this text is that Paul uses something from their culture to teach the truth about God. Now, if all you have is one or two verses out of that story, yeah, that's it. Okay, uses something from their culture to teach them about God, and he used this altar with an inscription to the unknown God. And he says, let me therefore tell you who the unknown God is. But they don't read this very closely, because when you look at Paul on Mars Hill, he was not an accommodating, seeker-friendly kind of movement that says, oh, you wonderful people, let me give you a little added insight into all these other gods you have. Let me show you another God. This is not, he was not kind to them. And we've seen it already here in verse 22. I perceive that in all things you're too superstitious. That is not a good introduction to win friends and influencing people. It's a condemnation right from the beginning. You're too superstitious. What are you guys thinking? And then it goes on in the next verse, verse 23, for I passed by and beheld your devotions. I found an altar with this inscription to the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him I declare to you. You guys are superstitious and ignorant. Sit down and let me tell you some truth. Now, that's not very seeker-sensitive. I would propose to you that when you look at Acts 17, beginning in verse 22, and you look at that story closely, he was not seeker-sensitive at all. He told them, I don't know what the Greek word is. He said, you guys are a bunch of ignoramuses. What in the world is going on? Let me try to talk some sense into you. And furthermore, though he made reference to their culture, it was not in a positive light. And he did not incorporate that really into his theology. He says, this is ridiculous. You got all of these gods, a city full of gods, and all you want to do is sit around and try to come up with something new and hear something new. And he was down on their theology, on the Stoics, on the Epicureans. He was down upon the worship that they were. So he was really coming and just dissecting their culture in a very negative and direct way. So that goes against, I think the text itself goes against when they bring up Paul and Mars Hill, Paul, he connected with the society. No, look at it. Actually read the story and you figure it out. And they don't want to read the story. And furthermore, what you see in Paul, you could follow this along, starting with, it'd make a great sermon someday. You could start with Paul on Mars Hill, and then you could follow it along, and you would find that what does Paul do? Paul, he always convinces by logic, reason, and speech. That's his tools. Logic, reason, and speech. It's the spoken word that he puts together logically, reasonably. Look up the times that it talks about Paul convincing them, or Paul reasoning with them, or Paul persuading them. This was his approach, was the spoken word, the foolishness of preaching, if you will. And that's what he carried out. So again, I think you could go through and put a disclaimer there all the way through. Appreciate that, John. Thank you. And Tony has a question. Are all of Bullinger's notes in the Companion Bible available in Logos, or is the hard copy better? Why, of course the hard copy is better, because you can get it from dispensationalpublishing.com, which actually is on back order right now, because our supplier and every supplier I have found is out of them right now. The company that publishes these, I've got order, and they promise me I'll get the first ones that come off, and I think it's about February. So if you order one now, you're not going to get it yet. You might be able to find one somewhere else on the internet, but why would you want to do that, right? But you might be able to find one now. But on Logos, you can get, as I have here on the left side of your screen, you can get the Companion Bible. It has, let me see if I can show you something here. It has here, let's see, try to do this backwards. This is the text of Scripture, and this is the notes that tie to this. So, Scripture and notes to that section of Scripture. These notes right here are completely in the electronic versions. I take that back. No, they are. Okay, because I showed you some earlier. Yes, these notes are in the electronic versions. That includes the outlines of these passages and his Greek notes, especially, or exegetical Greek or Hebrew notes that are there. All of that is there. Now, what you cannot see on this particular page, or you may be able to just barely see, right along here, there's some letters that come. Those letters actually tie in. Remember, we saw E, B, C, D, the letters earlier. That's not really the alphabet, is it? But we saw those letters. That is helpful as you're reading along to say, oh, this verse corresponds to F, and go back and find and easily put that together and find what you have right there. That's not available. The appendices are available. The outlines, I must say, though they're available, they're much easier to use in print because you really kind of need to see the whole thing, and you'll have to back up. Again, if you've got it right there along the side of your text, it tells you right where you are in that outline, and you can keep it going. You just don't have that. So I use both, honestly. I use the electronic because I can take it with me. This is a little big, the enhanced, enlarged type edition. A little big to carry with you to lunch. You could do it, but it's a little big. But if you got electronically, it's a little easier to carry around, even on the app. So I use both. I keep one of these in front of me because I often do go back, because those outlines especially back up and compare. So you've got many, but not all of the things. If I was just getting one, I would get the paper version in all of that. I appreciate that. Okay. And what I'm going to do, because I am out of time, I think maybe I got the all of the questions, and my very helpful staff here has given me the Statement of Faith for Proverbs 31 Ministries. We will take a look at that tomorrow and see if I'm wrong on where they come theologically. Let me just go ahead and give my predictions. It's a statement of faith that is going to be so vague as to say almost nothing. And there's going to be one or two things in which probably we would say that right there is the source of many problems to come. That's my prediction. We'll see if we're there tomorrow when we come on Wednesday for our Ask the Theologian. And we'll have a Wednesday special too. I'm not sure what it is right now, but we'll have that midweek special that may be popping up later today. And that's at dispensationalpublishing.com. But always a delight to be with you. Tomorrow night, the Gospel of John at 6:15 p.m. Mountain Time. And in the morning, 10 a.m., we will have our Ask the Theologian program. And full broadcast schedule this week with Galatians on Thursday night and Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of Ask the Theologian. Always a delight to be with you. And if we missed any, Nathan will let me know here in just a moment. And Corey, who are both in here, keeping us all together. And we appreciate that. Thanks for your prayers, your help, your support, and your encouragement. Question at randywhiteministries.org if you got a question you want to send in advance. And why don't you go spend some time rightly dividing the word of truth. God bless you. You're dismissed. Thank you.